Thank you all so much for coming here today. I am absolutely honored to be standing here, kicking off the second legislative step in our journey to elevate crime victims' rights to the Pennsylvania Constitution. My name is Jennifer Riley. I am the State Director for Marsy's Law for Pennsylvania. And to understand Marsy's Law, one must understand that the U.S. Constitution and every state constitution has enumerated rights for those individuals who are either accused of a crime or convicted of a crime, as it should. Yet the U.S. Constitution and 9 states do not elevate crime victims' rights to their constitutions. The Marsy's Law effort seeks to amend these state constitutions to include crime victims' rights equal to those rights of the accused and convicted. And the ultimate goal is to amend the U.S. Constitution. And as most things here, the road to Washington, D.C. leads through Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which ultimately shouldn't be that surprising because Pennsylvania's crime victim rights are incredibly robust and some of the best in the nation. However, Pennsylvania, unfortunately, is one of those 9 states whose constitution is silent when it comes to the rights of victims of crime. But that's going to change because today I'm flanked by advocates and survivors, members of our General Assembly, and law enforcement, all here in support of elevating crime victims' rights to our Constitution. Last year, Marsy's Law effort saw many successes, including passage in 6 additional states, as well as unanimous passage in both our House and Senate here in Pennsylvania. And all of this sets the stage for second passage here in Pennsylvania in this new legislative session. And with this passage, the members of our General Assembly will allow Pennsylvania voters to decide whether or not we value crime victims' rights enough to elevate them to our state constitution. And we all here believe that the voters agree. In fact, earlier this month, Marsy's Law commissioned a statewide poll in which 87% of Pennsylvania voters, when educated on the details about Marsy's Law, stated that they would vote in favor for Marsy's Law if the election were held today. That's 87%. And that support crossed every demographic, spanned every corner of our state, and spanned all political affiliation, which is pretty amazing. And that voter support, we hope, will be mirrored in the support from our General Assembly this legislative session. And with that, I am honored to introduce our prime sponsor in the House of Representatives, one of the best advocates for crime victims that we could ask for, Representative Sheryl Delozier.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody being here and the opportunity to speak about something that's very, very important, not only to me as an advocate for victims and many of the folks behind us, as you will hear from, that are not only some survivors, advocates, but people that take this issue really to heart and want to see this go across the finish line and take it to the voters for them to decide. But a year ago, I stood here and we started the process. And we stood with many colleagues, and we introduced and created this effort of a Victims' Bill of Rights. And because this work required a constitutional amendment, which you'll hear a lot about, I'm sure, from most of us, it does require 2 consecutive sessions. And then we take it to the voters. It's a very deliberative process, as it should be in changing the Constitution. And we are working this process through, and we're hoping that the citizens of Pennsylvania will get to decide. We've cleared the first hurdle, as we mentioned with last session, and it is an honor again to be the prime sponsor in the House of Marsy's Law, to get it done and to make it something that the people of Pennsylvania can call their own. Most of you have always been known that as I've advocated for victims, but the public today is much more aware of the uncertainty and that victims and their families face when they come forward to ask for justice. Many times people will talk about the fact of, you hear about in the courts, the victim blaming and doubting of the victim and what happens to people, but what you don't hear about is what those victims go through when they are going through the judicial system. Many times they feel that they're re-victimized by our judicial system, and that's why we need to move this forward. They need to have that voice in the judicial system, because we are one of 9 states that do not have it itemized in our Constitution. But the other issue is that in our Constitution, we have 26 delineated rights for those that are accused, and we have 0 for victims. We're not asking for anything that's over and above or something special and they should be treated better. We're simply asking them to be treated equally. That's not something that's out there, far out there, that we should be asking for people who have been made part of the judicial system, not through anything they did, through something that someone else did. Someone did something to them to make them a victim. They didn't ask to be part of this system. Why shouldn't the system at least treat them fairly and equally to what it is that their accuser is getting? I think that's only fair, and that's something that we should be asking for. So we're going to make sure that our voters hear about this and are educated on this, and that they can make that choice for us. But many times we have very, very diligent district attorneys, and we have wonderful district attorneys across our state, and many of them are standing with us here today. I know I saw Fran Chardo was here from Dauphin County. But sometimes things fall through the cracks. Sometimes things don't happen the way they should happen. And at this point in time, those victims have to just chalk it up. And many times you'll hear Jen Storm talk about, she has to say to a victim, "I'm sorry, we can't do anything about that." And we need to change that. So we never forget to notify a defendant as to when a court hearing is. We never forget to notify a defendant as to when it is their probation hearing is coming up or their possibility for parole. Why shouldn't we notify the victim and make sure that their voice is heard in this system as well? Instead of a courtesy, as it is in the state of Pennsylvania for the rights of victims, it should be a requirement, and that's what we're asking for today. So unfortunately, the victim's statutory rights, which is what we're talking about, don't rise to the level of a constitutional right, giving victims the ability to have a recourse if their voice is not part of this process. And that's the process we're asking for. So amending the Constitution is certainly a lengthy process. Amending the Constitution is the process we have to go through in order to make sure that our victims have the rights of those that are accused. This is a decision that we're not making this something that the legislature is making the decision, the governor is not making the decision. This being a constitutional amendment, we're putting it in the hands of the voters. We're putting this in the hands of the Pennsylvania residents. It's their constitution. They get to make this choice. So when we're talking about this, I just had a conversation with somebody really quickly yesterday off the floor. They said, "Tell me about what's going on with Marsy's law. I don't understand it." So we were able to have a quick 10-minute conversation delineating what we do have and what we don't have and what this is changing. That's what we need to do across Pennsylvania. We need to have those conversations with our voters, and you need to have those conversations. All of the advocates, all of the people that support this need to have those conversations with each and every one of their elected officials. Explain it to them. Talk about how this is just giving equal footing. We're not giving it any better or any worse, equal. Equality is what our Constitution's about, and equality is what we're asking for. So I ask you to talk, advocate, and carry that message forward so that when we hopefully get this on the ballot this November, which is our goal, people will know not only Marsy's story, maybe other victim stories as well, but they will know what Marsy's law is trying to do, and they will be supportive of that at the ballot in November. So thank you for the opportunity. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and I look forward to working with Senator Sabatina to get for the partnership bill over in the Senate, so we make sure we have it coming from both sides so people will hear a lot about us, so that's good. And look forward to working with so many of the groups that advocate for this change, and we look forward to keeping this moving to the end. So thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm State Senator John Sabatina. I'm proud to present the people of the 5th Senatorial District in Northeast Philadelphia and the River Wards. And I come here today as a proud supporter of Marsy's Law. I voted for it last year when Senator Reichenthal introduced it. And I want to first begin by thanking, people of Pennsylvania are actually fortunate to have such a strong network of victim advocates, victim services, and victim support. These people behind me work tirelessly to make sure that victims are equally treated, and that's why we're here today. My time in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office before I came to Harrisburg showed me a lot of things, and one of the things it showed me was that the victims of crime are often confused, they're befuddled by the process, and it's not a good time for them. And what Marsy's Law would do is make it a little easier for them. It would explain the process to them. It would give them the same rights as the people that are accused of crimes have right now. I think that's important, and I'm proud to here to support it today. The Senate version of Marsy's Law already has 26 co-sponsors, so I encourage my partner in the House, Representative Delozier, to hurry up and catch up. But it's one of those things where it's not a partisan issue. It's not a Republican issue. It's not a Democratic issue. It's a people issue. It's people of Pennsylvania issue. And when you have legislation like this, it makes it easier, quite frankly, to get a bill done. So I'm happy to be on board. I'm happy to lead the charge in the Senate and work with the people behind me to the fullest extent till we reach our goal and get that passed and get it on the ballot this November. So thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Kevin Steele. I'm the Montgomery County District Attorney. And I'm happy to be here today standing in the rotunda to support Marsy's Law, to support crime victims and their rights. In my 27 years as a prosecutor, I have seen the pain, the suffering that good people endure when they become victims of crime. Physical pain, emotional pain, pain for their family, pain for their friends, pain that they never asked for and never wanted. They are the victims of a crime because something happened to them and they are thrust into the legal system by circumstance. Yet despite that pain, the emotion, the hardship, victims show up in court over and over in order to make sure that their perpetrator is held accountable. As a prosecutor, the most important thing that I can do is to seek justice on their behalf. It is also important for a prosecutor to make sure that this legal process causes victims no more pain and anguish. To help victims, my office has a dedicated victim witness unit that is staffed by very caring people who work with victims and their families and the witnesses. They keep them informed of dates and appearances, about restitution, and the help that may be available to them, and other relevant information about their cases. But this dedication to keeping witnesses and victims informed is not always the case. But we as prosecutors need to be held accountable for that. No crime victims should be blindsided when they read something about a plea deal in a local newspaper or when they haven't been given notice about an upcoming court date. Victims need protections, and while victims have some rights currently guaranteed by Pennsylvania law, they are not constitutionally protected rights. They are not equal to the defendant's rights. So we have an opportunity here to fix that, to fix it with Marsy's Law. Marsy's Law will ensure that victims and their families will be informed about their rights, informed about their court dates, informed about the proceedings, and informed about the services that are available to them. They will be informed about developments such as a defendant being released on bail or if there is a pretrial disposition to the case. So beyond these notification provisions, Marsy law also provides for the prompt return of property once it is no longer needed as evidence, the right to restitution, and the right for a victim to be heard at a plea or at a sentencing hearing. It does not give the victim veto power at any step of the process, nor does it take away any rights from the defendants. It simply gives the victim equal footing with the defendants within the criminal justice system and requires that they be kept abreast of the case as it goes through the system. So as district attorney and as my fellow district attorneys, we know firsthand that crime victims and their survivors suffer enough. Their pain shouldn't be compounded through their interactions with our criminal justice system. Providing constitutional protections to victims through Marsy's law is a way to guarantee their equal and protected voice. I urge legislators to stand up for victims and once again, in this session, vote for Marsy's law. Now I get to turn it over to my friend Jen Storm.
Thank you very much. My name is Jennifer Storm. I am the appointed victim advocate for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We're here to kick off, as you have heard, the second round of what I believe is going to be the single most important thing that we can do for crime victims in our time here in Pennsylvania. I want to acknowledge and thank the sponsors, the District Attorneys Association, Marsy's Law at the national level and here at the ground level. And most importantly, I want to thank each and every survivor and advocate that is standing behind me and that is here. And if we could just pause and acknowledge them for a moment. Without you, without your steadfast support and you're always showing up, regardless of the weather, we wouldn't be able to do the good work that we try to do in this building every day. I want to thank each and every senator and House rep last session that voted for this bill. If you spend some time in this building, you know it's really hard to get unanimous support in both the House and the Senate. And I think that says a lot to the value and the importance of what we're trying to do. I have to say that next to raising my hand and taking my oath, when we get this bill to the ballot and when the voters affirmatively vote Marsy's Law, it will be the best day of my career, single-handedly. Currently, as you have heard, we are only one of 9 states that does not afford crime victims protections in their constitution. While the accused and the convicted have multiple enumerated rights, and they should. We should afford due process. We should afford individuals who are accused of a crime the right to defend themselves, and that should be enshrined in our Constitution. We should value that, and we do value that. But what we don't value is the experience of the victim. It creates an imbalance of justice. When victims have rights without remedies, do they really have rights? Constitutional rights are given at the highest level of importance on our system, right? We afford those constitutional rights to the accused because we want a just system. We want effective representation. But what does it say to the person who has been harmed, who was raped, who was beaten, shot, stabbed, or to the person whose loved one was murdered when we say, as a crime victim, you have a lower standard of rights in Pennsylvania? What does that say? So victims have statutory rights. What does that mean? If you know anything about the Constitution, if you know anything about criminal law, your constitutional right is the highest. Your statutory right is here. We have an imbalance in justice. And if and when someone tries to motion the court, guess what right wins every time? We quash the rights of the victims every time. Many people ask, well, why do we need Marsy's Law? We have these amazing, robust crime victims' rights, and we do. In 1995, we created the Crime Victims Act, and we gave victims robust rights. We gave them the right to be informed, to be present, to be heard, to be notified. We gave them the right to understand and appreciate what the process is going to look like for them. We gave them the right to restitution. We gave them the right to know when their offender is at all times. So then why is it that my office in the past 5 years has gotten over 100 complaints from victims who have called that said, I turned the corner in Giant and my rapist was there, and I thought he was still behind bars, and no one told me. I read in the newspaper that the person who murdered my loved one pled guilty, and he was sentenced, and he's in state prison, and I wasn't able to attend. I wasn't notified. I'm a victim of fraud, and I read that my perpetrator was able to plead, and I wasn't ordered restitution. And unfortunately, my office will do everything in our power to investigate the complaint, to reach out to the parties that are involved, and to attempt to remedy it. But if the case is concluded, I have to say, like Sheryl Delozier said, I'm so sorry, there's absolutely nothing I can do. It is the most hopeless, disheartening message that I have to give to a survivor. I cannot tell you how scary it is for victims to have to walk through a system, to have to put their faith and their trust in the justice system, as they have to do when they are unfortunately involuntarily involved in our system. We make a promise to victims. We promise them that they're going to be informed. We promise them that they're going to be notified. We promise them that they're going to be heard. We promise them that we're going to financially restore them to the extent possible. And unfortunately, we break that promise. And then we give them zero recourse to remedy it. I don't know if you've ever had someone promise you something and then break that promise. It's painful. I've heard from survivors that sometimes the breaking of that promise, the denial of justice in the system, is sometimes harder to cope with than the actual crime itself. We do better. We can do better in Pennsylvania. We will do better for crime victims. We made that promise to victims in 1995, and by passing Marsy's Law, which I believe wholeheartedly we will get this through, it will be unanimous again, and we get it to the voters and they affirmatively pass Marsy's Law, we will be able to finally say, you have rights, and you have rights with remedies. We're not saying that a victim's right's not going to get violated. It's going to happen. Our systems sometimes move very fast. Things happen. Information gets lost. Sometimes addresses aren't updated. As long as we're making an attempt to inform that victim and empower that victim, if and when something happens where their right is violated, they'll actually have the ability to motion the court for reconsideration. It gives them equal footing. We're not asking for anything less, anything more. But today is the day that we stop failing our crime victims. It's the day that we stop promising victims something and then not fulfilling that promise. I'm incredibly proud and honored to stand here today as we usher Marsy's Law through Pennsylvania and we become the next state to enshrine these valued rights into our Constitution. And I thank you for joining me.
Hello, bear with me, it never gets any easier every time I tell my story. I want to end up depleted emotionally, mentally, spiritually, financially, scarred physically for life, and then to have so few rights, to be judged and questioned, to live in extreme fear, to be isolated from friends and family, to feel deep shame. No one writes that in the "What do you want to do with your life" section of their school book. I have held the titles of executive, CEO, councilwoman, advocate, and more. However, there is one title I will always have in my life: victim. When I think of the years between 1999 and 2013, my senses were absolutely numbed. I cannot remember hearing anything when I replay it in my mind. I have been repeatedly stalked, threatened, severely beaten, and had too many bruises and broken bones to count. Anyone's worst nightmare was my daily reality. That is just a tiny glimpse of my story, a story that I just assumed I would be given the chance to tell every single time I had the courage to press charges or at any hearing that I was actually given notice of to attend. A story that deserves safety and inclusion in the process. I quickly found out that was not always a right given to me. Today, seeing the pain on a victim's face and the saturation of grief in their voice as they describe endless accounts of bruises, of fear, of loss, of debilitating emotional battery or forcible rape, the sight of pain on their face and the sound of hopelessness in their voice revokes any remaining apathy and replaces it with the full-fledged severity for strengthening victims' rights laws. Victims, like myself, who have endured horrific abuses, can be forced to interact repeatedly with their violent assailants both inside and outside of the courtroom. Imagine the difference for every victim if we had the ability to feel safe in and out of the courtroom. Imagine how many of us would show up to the hearings if we actually knew about them and felt safe. Why don't we deserve that safety and knowledge? With Marsy's Law, this can be done. Until you experience something yourself, you can't really be expected to know what it feels like. Give us the right and let us talk and tell you what it feels like to be a victim. We are just one person amid a world of influence. but our voices should stand out. Our voices should be heard. Our voices should count. With Marsy's Law, we can give the victims a platform and the opportunity and time to tell their story. We are already emotionally traumatized to the core and so lost, afraid of our past and fearful of our future. Many times, our lives and our loved ones' lives are constantly threatened. Let us and our loved ones finally be able to sleep at least a little bit at night. Jail release notifications, bond and/or parole hearing information are so very important to our safety plan, healing process, and can be life-saving all around. With Marsy's Law, we can have some peace of mind and start to heal and move forward again. We as victims can't change the past. What happened will always be with you, and that's the tragic part. But we can change how we treat victims and the incidences themselves. All victims hurt feel helpless, hopeless, and powerless. With Marsy's Law, we aren't powerless, and we can change that feeling we all feel. Marsy's Law would provide us the knowledge and power to have the right protections around us and our loved ones. A lot has changed for me since 2013. Today I get to advocate for those in the same position I was in and wasn't sure how to escape. Today in my work, I get to help victims every day, even if it is just listening or offering a smile. I am the operations manager for the largest comprehensive victim services center in the state, Center for Victims. We all have one thing in common there: to give all the victims the critical support, protections, and guidance they deserve. This includes having the safety, the knowledge, and the resources they need to heal in life. The Centers for Victims provides effective and quality services to hundreds of thousands of victims of all crimes, including domestic violence, rape, sexual assault, child sexual assault, physical abuse, elder abuse, homicide, burglary, and incidents of mass violence. Imagine the victim impact Marsy's Law would have if it was implemented throughout the entire state. In just one portion of Allegheny County, the Center for Victims provides direct services to nearly 16,000 victims yearly. Our victims must have an enforceable right to redress, restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, and to guarantee that it will never happen again. With Marsy's Law, we will be providing those rights and guarantees to those among us who most desperately need them. Thank you.
I just want to thank Stephanie Fox again for coming up here and sharing your story. It takes a lot of courage to do that, and that's not taken for granted here at Marsy's Law or underneath this dome. So thank you all again. As Jennifer Storm said, we can do better, Pennsylvania. Let's get Marsy's Law done. Thank you so much.